poor land use planning, indiscriminate approvals of building plans, often in violation of environment and municipal bylaws, and the absence of disaster risk assessment in urban design have resulted in what experts term concentrated concretization, predisposing cities to disaster risks. The December 2015 Chennai flood claimed 270 lives and inflicted an economic loss of more than 15,000 crores. On its heels, on January 4, an earthquake of 6.7 magnitude shook Manipur and the northeast, unraveling India's lack of disaster preparedness. A UN report in 2015 has claimed that natural disaster cost India at least $7 billion a year. According to UN Habitat, India has only one planner per 400,000 population in comparison to the UK, which has 148 planners for the same strength of people. In this episode of India Risk Report, we look at the disaster response policy of India and how the industries affected by them are responding.
Hello and welcome to another episode of India Risk Report. And in this episode, we are looking at disaster management and the methods that we can apply to overcome disasters. Since India in particular has been facing disasters repeatedly, man-made and natural disasters, but all over the world, since the 20th century, there have been more than 200 major natural disasters, and that in itself has claimed 1.4 million lives, apart from the many more million lives that were destroyed because of the impact of these disasters. South Asia in particular is a part of the world which is very heavily disaster prone, and in India we are witnessing from time to time earthquakes, floods and other natural disasters, as well as certain disasters that take place because of man-made carelessness and other efforts which were not counted in time, such as poor structural buildings, etc. And we have two experts who understand the subject and are going to enlighten us today. We have Professor Santosh Kumar from the Policy Planning and Community Issues part of the National Institute of Disaster Management. And my earlier conversations with you, Professor, I'm feeling comfortable that you seem to be pretty much on top of the subject. And we also have Ms. Priyanka Bhattacharya of GenPact. She's the Vice President of Business Continuity. I'll start with you, ma'am, Ms. Priyanka Bhattacharya. Now, it's said that the corporate sector is very conscious of disasters primarily because they do not want their business and the business-related activities to be impacted too seriously by disasters. So, from the top of your head, could you just give us a general picture that what you think are the measures most companies are taking, what more could be done so that as a first step, as a first responder to disasters, you have your staff and your infrastructure well looked after to take on the first few minutes of a major disaster?
Sure. So if you look at a disaster, the way to plan for something like this is in two parts. One is proactive and one is reactive. So if you look at the proactive bit, you do a complete risk assessment of the areas of the premises that you're situated in, the surrounding areas, the geopolitical issues that you have, and find out what the mitigation plans are around this. The second bit is, should a disaster strike you, what is your crisis response plan? So do you have standard operating procedures? Do you exercise them? Do your people know how to deal with them? And then how do you exercise this? You have a rigor where you get your employees, you get your technology, you get your suppliers, everyone participate in that, and how do you actually find out learnings and then implement them? So these help us actually formulate the go-forward mechanism.
So you have standard operating procedures in place, and do you go through regular rehearsals, and do you keep people reminded that this is something that they must keep updating these?
Yes, so there is an employee awareness and communication plan that works in most of the corporates. Every time there is a different scenario which is enacted. Generally, it's done 4 times a year. So right from an earthquake to a fire scenario, these are exercised. So in some of the places beyond India, like in the Philippines, there are some tests done even for tsunamis and for earthquakes in Guatemala. So these are things that actually corporates do this regularly.
Okay, Professor Santosh, India, they say, has the greatest number of people exposed to natural hazards. This could be anything from floods and nature-related calamities, followed by China, Indonesia, United States, Nigeria, etc. But India, 1 billion people, they say, is exposed to that. And so many of the rankings that various international agencies give, we are at the top of it in one way or the other as country that is exposed to it. Now, is that because we have 1 billion plus people, so therefore our numbers always propel us to the top of the people who are likely to face natural hazards, or is it because we haven't done enough to address the concerns of the international observers that as a country we could have a far more double quick time approach to dealing with disasters?
No, in fact, India, everything is in volumes now, as you have very rightly pointed out about the 1 billion plus population. The exposure of risk is India, geophysical environment is such that we are highly exposed to different kind of natural disasters. However, the development taken place over the years has also not incorporated that risk management principles in the development process. So that anything which have developed, the structure or the buildings or whatever, it has also not gone into that risk reduction mode, what she is saying as a proactive mode. So the challenge has multiplied manifold. One is the exposure itself, and what we are saying, not incorporated resilience profile into development process, further added the problem. So that is leading to human induced disaster also. So that combining the two, the risk profile have gone very high. Coming to the process of engagement in terms of risk reduction proactively, it has not been started earlier in a very comprehensive manner. But of late, yes, India has started with the format in terms of institutional framework, very organized manner, but the challenge is very huge in terms of exposure. One is this in terms of physical exposure, where the people get affected and get lost, I mean, they lose their lives. And second is also economic resilience is not built so far, so that huge loss also happening to the property, leading to volumes of money in terms of billions of rupees we are losing almost on an average basis. Study conducted also in terms of that how much India is losing as economically. So 2% of the GDP, the study conducted long back by the World Bank per annum. So 2% of the GDP for $1 trillion economy. So it's a very much important to address this financial resilience, structural resilience, and also
2% of GDP is a worrying figure, but the fact is, what control do you have over natural disasters?
No, what I am saying is that control physical, geophysical environment is known to us now. So now any development intervention which we are making in those areas which is high prone to various natural disasters, that is bound to happen. So what we are saying that infrastructure can be improved, the design parameters can be different. Even if we are putting our own houses, how our houses are going to be a kind of a resilient housing. So bridges, so everything. You get large number of data when post-disaster event happens, and you get the data that each sector is losing with the private sector and the public sector, plus different sectoral investment is just going haywire.
Yeah, actually, I mean, most buildings in India and most cities in India have not adopted design parameters that are spelt out. And there's always, between a wink and a smile, you get your formalities and your paperwork through. But Ms. Bhattacharya, a question regarding the corporate sector. You did outline that your response mechanisms, how you broadly define them and put them into categories. But are there cases where we can point towards CSR or business continuity models which have helped in disaster risk mitigation, and these measures can become standard operating procedures for everybody?
I'll quote an example from a business continuity planning model that we had. There was one incident that happened in one of our premises a couple of years back. This was actually a man-made disaster. There was an explosion in one of the oil depots which were close to our buildings, and our processes, our building got impacted. We had about 1,000 people Thankfully, there were no injuries and casualties. However, the business process got impacted. So one of the learnings we took back from there was ensure that when you're picking up a site, you do not add, you add, proximity to a fuel station as one of your risk parameters when you're identifying the next property. So that's one. Including the nuclear disaster, I mean, we would not want to be in a place where there is a proximity to a nuclear reactor, a station, etc. So that's one. From a CSR standpoint, we leave corporate social responsibility at that itself. I mean, not that corporate social responsibility has something to, has a role to play in business continuity management. Like I was just mentioning that we leave it to what that really denotes, which is underprivileged children or places and NGOs. We work with them. So we have a very strong corporate social responsibility team.
And so it'll be fair to say that let's not mix CSR with disaster response.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a good point, and we are looking at a break, and after a break we're going to come back and look at what technologies can be absorbed right across the country to have quicker responses to disaster, what kind of state and center connectivity is important for all states to be on the same page to address disaster issues, and what can be realistically expected from the industry and the business and the corporate fraternity. But that after a break. Welcome back. We continue to have our two experts with us, and I go to you, Professor Saab. You were telling me that there is a lot of movement at the state level in addressing disaster-related issues. But my facts say that as per a 2013 CAG report, Maharashtra is the only state that has a state and district level disaster mitigation fund. And other steps that have been taken also have not been across the board in the country been effectively implemented. Is there a problem between the center-state relationship, which we saw in terms of dealing with issues like terrorism, national response to police modernization, etc.? Here again, is there a bureaucracy at play?
Not really. What I'm seeing in the disaster management area, especially when it is a state subject, but however, national government is very much supportive of the national and the state initiatives. Combining together, you said this mitigation fund has been created by government of Maharashtra alone. What I'm saying is it's a national act 2005 on disaster management. The very proviso has been made for the risk prevention and for the creation of the mitigation fund. So here is a challenge where the mitigation fund is that government is trying very hard to get this actually constituted. So Finance Commission comes in and analyzes that what kind of allocation should be made. So Finance Commission has given its recommendation in terms of that how calamity relief fund post-disaster and mitigation can be taken as a regular development intervention fund. So any sector is spending say 5,000 crores for development, so they should have ideally make a resilient investment. So that is a kind of a mitigation fund which is not created is actually getting translated into like how that development fund itself have this kind of a composition. So now the government of India has made as a kind of a proviso any centrally sponsored scheme submitted to government of India more than 100 crores, they will have this provision of 30% of that as a kind of a inbuilt kind of a mechanism for risk reduction. And also that any fund centrally sponsored scheme, 30% of that of each sector will go for disaster mitigation, so risk reduction. So you can say that even if the proviso of the act has not been done at the state national level, which you are saying, but it has been translated into different mode in terms of inbuilt project mechanism. So we have to see this impact, but that money is not being spent by the various sectors so far. So here is a challenge that how we can quicken and do the resilience investment.
So taking on from what he was saying, where do you feel that there is a mismatch between what you're trying to achieve in the corporate sector and what the government is trying to achieve. There's one aspect which is very clear, that at the end of the day, it's your typical thing that people have. We've paid the money to the government, we've paid our taxes, now it's the government's job to look after us. But I would personally believe that we all have to be more actively involved in addressing issues of national concern. So it's one thing when there is a disaster for a lot of people to come and start collecting old clothes and doing that kind of stuff. That is conscious keepers who go out and do it. But how is it that at the start of a crisis, question, does your organization have a hotline to the national disaster body? Does your organization pick up the phone and check that, if you're suspecting that there is a crisis going to be in Delhi and metro lines are all being vacated? In the United States, the metro was one area where people were pushed down into in the event of a possible nuclear threat. So that was designed in such a way that those would serve as homes for people till the air outside would become safe and secure. So what is your connect with Sarkar?
Okay, so our connect with Sarkar is through a liaison officer that we have. We do not have a hotline really to the national disaster management teams. I can quote an earthquake monitoring line that's available all the time. So every time there's a tremor, whether felt or unfelt, if you call them, they've always been responsive, and they'll exactly tell you where the epicenter is and how far, etc. So other than that, I think the efforts that the government has to make their national disaster management side visible has to be a little more aggressive, at least towards the corporates.
So the government is, and you are happily working in watertight compartments, hoping.
No. So there are forums, there are business continuity forums, for example, where we are working towards making this relationship more. I mean, it's a both side. It's a dual relationship. It can't just work from one side. So there are efforts being made now. Yes, it was not there all this while, but going forward, there will be better synergies between both sides.
Well, we're talking about information. So, there are a couple of information shortcomings which are not just in India, but everywhere in the world. Firstly, there's not having complete information on what different sectors are actually contributing or spending. So for you to be able to make a national disaster plan, you need more inputs. You may be able to get governmental spending, but the corporate sector is also doing its share of putting back into India. So do you get that information? Also, are you able to discern private sector, especially businesses, which areas they can best contribute, and do you reach out to them and ask them that, would you be interested in partnering us in these initiatives? And finally, do you have enough evaluation data where contributions and investments for recovery can be put together in some kind of a pool?
Twofold. One, you asked about that how that corporate and others, that information flow goes very easily in terms of even the crisis and pre-crisis period also. And the second part is that how this recovery is taken place in the country. So for the first thing which I would like to highlight, yes, of late the government has been trying to create platform. So Government of India has created a national platform where the national platform, civil society, NGOs, corporate, private sectors, all, and dedicated sessions are planned for that. And they are sharing their experiences and also what they want from the government and all. This kind of a collaborative efforts have begun. Secondly, also India also had this Asian Ministerial Conference in November 2016. So 17. There also it was decided, with the first conference after this Sendai, which global commitment, that how all the stakeholders come together and draft an action plan. So Honorable Prime Minister gave the 10-point agenda for taking up by 2030. So their corporate roles are very, very high, and especially focusing on the infrastructure and development orientation. So what I'm saying is that flow of information has begun. We are collaborating with all the chambers of commerce, CII, SOCHM, FICCI, and also on a regular platform. So only yesterday we had finished one workshop where the large number of participants were from the private sector. So engagement of these two are very much there, and free flow of information and also kind of with a organized platform. Second is also that arrangement which we are saying in terms of recovery. Of late, again, I am saying that recovery was not given as a due consideration because of the funding issues. So options are getting explored.
Streamlined.
Streamlined, yeah. So disaster recovery is a big challenge, but it has a huge economic implications. And so that funding is not there. So exploring private sector approach in terms of bringing insurance, other financial instruments.
Well,
so
good you made this last point, because it leads me to my last question to her, which is that there is a concern in some quarters that private agencies or private companies will shut out the role of the government and non-profit groups in disaster relief and response in the event of a major calamity. How would you respond to this criticism?
I don't think there's any basis to this criticism. I don't think this is something, it's more humane than anything else. I mean, how can you just say that we won't help any NGO to restore or recover from a calamity that the
Because
nation is
when a
going
crisis
through?
does happen, everyone to himself and God for us all.
No, I mean, we've seen this happening all this while without any push. It's a person's own free will. So I don't see why that should go and why any of our government agencies or somebody else has to come and govern that. So
Okay.
I think this is.
So obviously there have been a lot of important points brought out. Having spoken to you, Professor Saab, I'm feeling more reassured that there are steps being taken, but the general impression that we have about disaster management in the country, that it's far from satisfactory and it's far from the comfort level that we as citizens would like to have. There are various reasons. One is there aren't enough disaster management drills and practices that are carried out to give us a feeling that in the event of a crisis, where do we go? At the same time, the corporate sector seems to know what they're doing, but again, by nature of their work, they are all governed by their higher organizations, in many cases, which are outside the country. So while they are connected to everybody, they are not necessarily answerable to any one single point authority here, whereas you are answerable to the Government of India. But I think the trick lies in synergizing our resources, because in the event of a disaster and a crisis, every bit of resource is going to be valuable.
Right.
And disasters, as I brought out earlier, are something that are a given in South Asia, more specifically in India's case, where we have amongst the highest number of natural disasters and calamities regularly taking place. Thank you very much for being with us on this show. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, goodbye.